Hi, and welcome to the Artist's Corner section of 42 Geek Street. I'm Mike, and with me today I have Fil Barlow. Phil, thanks for coming down today. Well, thanks for letting us into your house today, I should say.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it's like, we're just going to rock up to anywhere, but it's fine.
That's cool.
Now, while we're here today, is we're going to talk a little bit about what you're doing. You're doing some artwork using a traditional method of using inks, using the nibs and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But we also wanted to talk about a little bit about your history,
Right.
Where you started, where you've been, and where you are now, I suppose, and what's happening for the future.
Okay.
So I suppose to
We're
start,
first.
yeah, let's go from the beginning.
All right.
So yeah, I suppose, where did you start off? Did you start off Melbourne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was born in Adelaide. Melbourne was where I started. I've basically been doing comics since I was about 6 years old. And the first comic I did went around school. I printed it, went around school in the old days with the Romeo. So it was a very old technique, and I sold them for 5 cents, put it into social services is what we had back then. Then when I was about 11, I got something printed in a thing called the Observer newspaper on Sunday, and that ran for 4 weeks, and that was my first actual printing experience. But I went professional at 16 working for Australian Scout magazine.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, I've been around a while.
Yeah. And I suppose you've got a very distinctive style, especially over the years, seeing a lot of the work you've done. Where did that come from? Was it all just from your mind? Did you have any kind of, I suppose, inspiration starting you off as to what you were doing?
You pick up stuff as you go along. So when I first started, I was interested in doing kids' books, but when I discovered Asterix, that was a huge thing. But I was also looking at, there were English comics at the time, I think called Shiver and Shake, Buster and Chip, Whizzer and Chips.
Yep.
Beano, all that sort of weird stuff.
Viz magazine.
That came later, and that was copying that sort of style but they had all sorts of weird little creatures and different styles, and a lot of them were Scottish artists who were working on that stuff, and I really enjoyed what they were doing, and that sort of inspired me. Mad Magazine, those sorts of things, and a whole mixture. And then the European stuff started coming in through Asterix, and eventually Metal Hurlant and Mobius and Mubius. And so you get all these different, an opening to all these different styles. Richard Corbin.
Yep.
And so as time went on, the smorgasbord of what you could look at grew. I was looking at Robert Crumb at 14, for example. So all the early underground comics I was looking at 14. And it really helped me sort of look at wild, crazy styles, things like that. But I really still had my own thing going at 14. And I don't know quite where, it was you pick stuff up and you find your own voice. And that's largely what I was doing.
No, I can definitely get a feel for that, because with myself, I've been, you do a lot of different styles, and you'll incorporate a lot of that into your own work. And it took me forever to get something that I was kind of happy with, that not only felt comfortable for my own hand, but you just kind of like the style of it. So,
Exactly. There's practice too. Like the more you put stuff in print, the more you get a feel for it, and that's why the Australian Scout magazine was so fantastic, because I was able to start using brush in print, and I hadn't quite got to nib at first, but I was doing it from 16 to 19, so it ran my whole. Like I was actually doing a comic that was in print called Time Tree when I was 18 in a magazine called Breakout, and that gave me a lot of story. I was testing story ideas at that point, but the Scout magazine, I was testing technique and style and things like that.
Oh, cool. And
because they were sort of periodical cartoons, I could really experiment with different ideas, and that was a really helpful experience to have.
Okay, cool. So Scout magazine was probably like, that was your big thing starting off there and bringing it all through.
First professional job,
And so where did you go to from there?
Well, 18, like I said, I went and did Breakout, and around the same time there was Space Age Books, which was basically I'd do any work I could to get enough money to afford books and comics. So Space Age Books was I think it was Swanston Street, was one of the places, it was a mecca, and then Minotaur Books started up. And they were in a different location. Back
in Bourke Street,
Earlier.
Where were they originally?
I can't even remember now. I could look it up and I'll let you know. But it was, I've forgotten the name of the street. But it was just a small little hole, and it had all these amazing comics in it. And it was just fantastic. and they printed the first issue of Ink Spots, and then I was invited to a meeting. I was 18. I was invited to a meeting to talk about the next issue. And so all these guys, I was around other cartoonists for the first time in my life, and it was just the most incredible thing. And all the comic slots had been taken, and the only thing available was the cover. And I said, okay, so who wants to do the cover? And in typical sort of Melbourne fashion, everyone goes, look shy and look down, and like they didn't want it. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And it was my only opportunity to get anything in that issue. And of course, that then labelled me as a go-getter and a sellout. So from then on, I lived with this reputation of being a sellout. But it was just, I was keen to go.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, doing a cover, I mean, that's
huge.
It's a great opportunity.
For me, at 18, it was huge.
That's it. That's what gets people in to read the rest of the books.
Yeah.
So it's.
And it was a David Bowie-ish sort of thing. There was a thing called Harlequin it was based off, and Steph Campbell and Daryl Lindquist were working on this comic together, and so I was taking their character and turning it into. But then the third issue was based off my story, which was Scarpion, and Franz Cantor did the cover for that. And then the last issue, which was the fourth issue, I did the cover for it, again, but based off a story called Asphyxiation. So the problem for me was that as much as I love doing ink spots, and I love the camaraderie of all these artists working together, it was something that didn't come out quickly enough for me. I needed a much more regular place to put my work. There were other magazines at the time. There was Reverie. I'm trying to think of others, but there were a bunch of them. And whenever there was a publication that I was allowed to put work in or was open to other work, I'd always submit something. And usually in a different style, because I was trying different things out.
Yep.
So the idea was that was what got me in a relationship with Minotaur. Colin Paraskevas was one of the guys. There was Greg Gates, Colin Paraskevas, and Philip Bentley. And the three of them were originally partners in Minotaur. And then as time went on, they sort of went their separate ways. And we were talking about, the problem was we were all influenced by the European thing. So we were all very snobbish about it, and we all wanted to do comics like Europeans and all black and white, larger format than the American stuff. We didn't want to do the American stuff. And Colin was saying, look, we've got to do it more commercial. We need to do it more like the Americans do. We've got to do it through their market. We've got to do it that way to be successful financially, and to make a career of it, to make it work. And everyone else was like, no, we want to be arty, we want to do it French style and do all this. So he said, all right, let me know when you want to go my way. I'm going to go, and I can't support this direction. So he went off, and we continued. We did the fourth issue, and then the fifth issue was going to be more about Zooniverse, as I was starting to introduce it. I actually did a whole bunch of pages, and Zooniverse was one of the main things. I did a cover for it, and at that point Greg felt that financially he couldn't commit, and he dropped the project. Right. But we'd already done all the bromides, all the artwork was done, so it was kind of this like, you're here, and it's like, what do you do? So in typical fashion I said, well, I'm going to keep going. And that got back to Colin, and Colin rang me up and said, here, you want to keep going with Zooniverse? I said, damn straight. And he said, all right, well, let's, would you be interested in doing it in American format and colour and do it in the American market? And I said, sure, okay, let's do this. And so I went ahead and I made 5 pages in the back available to the artists who originally I'd worked with it in ink spots. And the idea was to keep bringing new artists to the American public that way. So we managed to do the 6 issues. Helen came on as a colorist, and the problem with the first issue was that the colouring was all hand painted, but we had a custom strike. And so I had a month. The artwork all went to America, got set up as bromides and transparencies, all came back so that we could do the colouring, and there was a custom strike. So we had a month before it had to go to press. So we ended up, when the customs decided not to have it, the customs workers decided not to have their strike, it was 3 weeks had passed. We had a week to do it. So I was stuck with trying to find as many people as I could to help us paint the first issue. And I pulled in a lot of favours, and all those people have since not spoken to me. But we ended up doing the first issue, got it done, and I'd worked 3 days straight, and it was Michael Logan who actually took the artwork out of my hands and put it through, I think it was through American Express or something like that, to get it out of my hand, FedEx, back then. Okay. But he actually was clocking down the hours until he took it out of my hands and took it. It got printed, everything worked out fine, and then we had progressively the right deadlines to do the rest of the issues. But it came out every 2 months, and Michael Mignola was actually bringing out a comic at the same time, Starstruck, and he was missing his deadline. So his comic, here's me sort of seeing how well he's doing, and he's missing issues, and it's going on for another couple of months, and I was meeting every deadline, and so I was quite happy that I was being fairly professional by meeting all the deadlines. But I was writing it and illustrating it, and Helen was helping me with colour. But everything was done by hand. Everything was done long before computers, and we made every single deadline. So it was a huge thing for me. And then, of course, this strange thing happened where the comic market in America boomed and busted. And I don't know if you're aware of that happening in the 80s.
No, probably not from myself.
Yeah.
No.
86. There was I don't quite know all of the details, but apparently there was a thing where first issues of independent comics were being picked up by investors.
Right.
But then they weren't buying the rest of the story. So what was happening was comic shops would buy all of the issues of a particular series and then realised that people weren't buying all of the issues, so they were basically getting stuck with stock. So it ended up with a situation where we sold 30,000 copies, or we had 30,000 copies printed for the first issue, and by the time the 6th issue came out, there were only 5,000 printed. And basically comics were dead at that point, and everybody went back to the security of Marvel and DC, and all the independents kind of died out. By the time the 6th issue came out, I was already working in America on ALF. And in fact, I was in LA when it hit the stands, and all the guys I was working with said, hey, we're going to go buy your comic, because they all liked what I was doing, which is the reason I was there. And I didn't want to go, because I was too shy. I just didn't want to have them pointing at me, talking to the comic shop owner, and it was just too much. So I said, I'll stay and work. So they came back armed with all the comics.
So, how did that all start? I mean, how did getting onto ALF and all that kind of come together?
That was all weird as well.
Yeah.
So I was working with this. Minotaur was basically my only contact for, I'd come in, I'd put some artwork in. And so I went in to see Colin one day, and I'd been away for 3 months because I was so broke I couldn't go in to buy anything. And so I turned up, and he said, "Oh, we got a phone call from America." And I said, "Okay." And I went home, rang the number, and it was Richard Reynos. And Richard Reynos ended up becoming the producer of The Simpsons.
Okay. Yep.
But back then he was just a director, producer of ALF. And when I rang him back, apparently what he'd done was he'd contacted Eclipse in America. They'd contacted America. Then he had to contact Australia through Minotaur. And then Minotaur had got the number, and he'd actually rung the day before. So when I rang him up, it's like the next day. He said, "Wow, that was quick." So that was my relationship. That's how that began with them. But it had been Kevin Altieri who'd shown Richard Reynos the comic. And Kevin ended up being a director on Batman, the first Batman series with Bruce Timm. And he brought all these storyboard artists over to work with him on that. But before that, we all worked on ALF at Geek in Encino, LA, and I was flown over and working there for 4 months, and it was probably the best experience I had with a small group of people in one room. It got a little crazy, but it was a lot of fun. And like I said, that was the end of my comic career at the time and the beginning of my animation career. And that was 87, sorry.
And you had a fairly diverse career with animation. So from ALF, where'd you move on to from then?
Well, I did the first season, then returned to Australia. And for the second season, I said, look, I'm not going without Helen, because we just couldn't spend that much time apart. So they actually flew both of us out, and we stayed for 8 months. And we did the second season of ALF, which was ALF and ALF Tales. There was a pilot. I do pilot stuff that they were pushing to do. Deke was trying to undercut, I forget who it was, Filmation maybe, but they were trying to undercut for Beetlejuice. And so I actually did designs as a conceptual designs for Beetlejuice to try and see if they could steal that job away from whoever ended up doing it. I think Nelvana maybe? It might have been Nelvana. So there were different shows like that I would do. There was little storybooks. There was a storybook thing. Captain N actually, was just before we left. And what happened was, for that show, I got to play some Nintendo. There was one Nintendo console. We borrowed it for one day, one evening, and Helen and I were playing all these games all night, and then the next day we had to return it. And that was pretty much all the time I had to do sketches and design characters that were for a thing called Buddy Boy. So Richard was pushing this idea of Buddy Boy, and Nintendo didn't like it. So he said, all right, well, let's look for a similar concept. So he found that there was a Paperboy game. So he called the concept Paperboy. No, I think it started with Paperboy, and they said they didn't want Paperboy, and he changed it to Buddy Boy.
Right, okay.
So it went the other way, because he was basing it off a game they didn't really care for as much. And the idea was that he was surrounded by all these... The concept that I was working with, because I was largely left to sort of come up with ideas, was that it's a paperboy who would bring papers into the game world, and the creatures weren't used to the reality, and they get hooked on it like we get hooked on games. And that's how we defeat creatures and things, by getting them to read the newspaper. And so it's silly little ideas like that that became these series of designs that I did. They were blown up huge, like about 7 foot tall, and he took them into the pitch meeting, and it was kind of nixed and put on ice. And then I ended up back in Australia, and it then got approved but changed to Captain N. And by that stage, the artists that I'd trained on ALF now were the designers on this new show.
Right, okay.
And they took all the choice jobs, and eventually I got weeded out until I had no work and I was dead broke again. Later on, they did a thing on Nintendo. Richard got another team together for another project, which was, if you remember Winsor McCay, Little Nemo in Slumberland.
Right,
It's a classic, 1907. He's like the father of comics, the father of animation. And so Winsor McCay, this amazing artist, they were doing an animation of him, but it was based on Little Nemo. It was being done through a Japanese animation house, TMS, who'd bought the rights. And they ended up doing this thing where we went off and we prepared all this stuff, and then for some reason they nixed the thing. And so I was stuck with all these designs and things that I'd done, that I did as faithfully as possible to Winsor McCay's characters. And all these years later now, there's now this huge tabloid-sized book that's being done by a bookstore called Locust Moon Comics.
Yeah.
And they're now doing a Kickstarter, which is just about to finish. And I've been asked to do one page for that. So it was really fantastic for me to sort of do Nemo again and sort of honour Winsor McCay.
Mm.
So that was another project I did, again, from Australia. And then the work kind of dried up a bit, so we moved around. We were kind of broke, and I tried as many things as I could do in Melbourne, and it didn't work out. And then I started touring Victoria, showing kids how to draw cartoon characters, and I saw about 2,000 kids in the end.
Wow.
It was a wonderful experience, but I was showing them Zooniverse, and they're saying, well, why don't you do a comic for us that's for kids, not for adults? So that got me thinking, and I ended up in Queensland, and I was working... I found through Megazone magazine, so if you remember the Sega system,
Yep.
Sega gaming system, found Megazone magazine, and what I was trying to find was a way to be paid an ongoing amount of money to do comics in Australia, and that's what I was really looking to do. So I discovered this magazine, I approached them, they said yes, 2 pages, at the time it was bi-monthly, so 2 pages every 2 months, and I basically did enough work in the end to fill a 46-page book. So I actually finished an entire book. And by that stage, the editors had changed, and the new editor just didn't like my comic. He didn't want me doing it. He said it didn't have anything to do with games, and he wanted something more game-centric. So I got a long-time friend, Gary Challoner, to take over from me, because I wanted to make sure at least somebody who was a friend of mine got the gig.
Yep.
So now that I had, now that I had Rex Vector finished and complete, I thought, well, let's approach publishers. And so I approached every single publisher I could find around Australia. I sent them a manuscript of Rex Vector. I explained this is fully coloured. It had a print run of 50,000, so the audience of 50,000 exists already. And it's finished. The book's finished. So really there's no outlay. You just have to print it and distribute it. It's like a no-brainer. I got rejected. I got rejected because either they said I needed to talk to their European branch, their English branch, their American branch, or we just simply don't print comics. So I couldn't find a home for this project. So even though the kids had asked me to do a comic for us, I had got it distributed through Megazone, but I couldn't get it printed as a book yet.
Yeah.
So unfortunately I had to abandon that. So Helen and I had been doing puppetry for Queensland Theatre of Puppetry, and we moved on to doing that as a green screen project. We tried it as a promotional thing, and the idea was to teach kids how to draw using puppets. And although I'd toured Victoria, I wanted to have a little sort of video version that could take my place, and we could possibly sell that or distribute that somehow. Channel 10 was interested. They said, if you can get a provisional C from the government, we'll air it. And so we approached the government. They showed their child psychologist. The child psychologist said it was too gruesome because the character was made out of a squiggle. So of course he was a bit misshapen, because I was trying to show that even little rejected squiggles can turn into characters, and that was the concept behind this character. So because they never showed any actual kids, you didn't get to see their... Kids loved it. Like, they loved this. We made it kind of interactive. So you play the video, stop it, and the kids could do a drawing. Then you go back to the video again. It was interactive that way. But it got rejected. So in frustration that Australia just was a bunch of closed doors, I looked back to America, and as it turned out, Richard Rainus was now setting up a new studio over in LA called Columbia TriStar.
Right, okay.
Boy, are you sorry you asked this question.
No.
So Columbia TriStar was now setting up with originally Jumanji. So I did a design for Jumanji that was used in the pitch at UPN and Channel 13 in America. They rejected me, but chose Everett Peck, who was a long time artist, illustrator who'd worked with Richard on Real Ghostbusters.
Yep.
And Richard then said, well, look, Phil, why don't you try Ghostbusters? So I started doing some artwork and designs for that, and we were going back and forth, showing ideas, doing some designs. At the same time, I was working on a thing called Gen 13, which was put out by Image. It was Wildstorm with Jim Lee, I think his name was.
Yep, that's right.
He created the concept. What had happened with Image was you had artists who'd come from Marvel and DC in the 90s. Now, of course, I was completely out of comics by that stage, although what I tried to do when I was in Queensland was every time there was a small publication, I'd do a comic for them. So Platinum Grid, I was doing comics for them. You've seen that?
Yeah, I was a big fan.
Trudy Cooper, she's amazing. She's still doing comics today. Oglaf.com. Really cool stuff. So all these artists, Groovy Gravy, with, I can't think of his name, but there are all these different, Brad Daniels, thank you. So Brad Daniels with Groovy Gravy. There are a whole bunch of...
Great name.
And he likes gravy. So we're in LA and he's like, I need gravy.
That should be like a product placement for Greybox or something, It could just work really well. Patent pending.
No, it was a really cool comic. And I did what I was doing too, was DV as well. There were a bunch of different Brisbane comics that were just starting up in the 90s, and I do a different style for each of them, so that my whole thing was to try and create comics that were being done in Australia to make them unique here. So that rather than seeing, in the 80s I saw a lot of imitations of American superheroes. And I didn't understand that because, Zooniverse is its own thing. It's not you can't put your finger on it being from anywhere.
No, I mean, look, when I was first seeing all that stuff myself, it's such a different look to, most things that are out there. And that's what was so cool. And it's like, even seeing a lot of the real Ghostbusters stuff, I mean, to me, I'm like, that's just a great fit because when you're talking about ghosts and all that kind of thing, well, you can just go nuts, really. So, and I think that's a different thing, and it's unique and it stands out from everything else because, like you said, I mean, you have a lot of either your superhero tales, or you're going to have your dark and gritty kind of thing. So
that came a little, Actually, there was a thing called Fantastic, which was that's a difficult thing to talk about because the artists involved with that created an opportunity where they got funding. But rather than doing something, when you take government money, it would be a decent idea to make something that was accessible to more people. But they did gore and gratuitous violence, and of course the government just washed their hands of the project. So something that potentially could have been ongoing and fostered some kind of government involvement in helping comics become something interesting in the 90s. These guys kind of shot themselves in the foot, and It was typical.
Which is fine because I like violence, so
Well,
it was good.
the thing for me is it's like you've got to be careful, because the reason that comics kind of died in Australia was because of the violence that was coming in from the stuff from America was coming to our shores, and parents particularly, were seeing this stuff and going, this isn't suitable for our children. And they then petitioned the government, and they killed. We had a very healthy comic industry here in Australia. It was being pushed out of the way by the American industry being so dominant and being allowed to be dominant. The same thing has happened here again now, where the American industry is very dominant and is very prevalent. Like, people are just, the characters are so iconic, the superheroes particularly, that when people think comics, they think, oh, well, superheroes. But
that would also be, I suppose, supported by the films. You know,
yes,
when they see that, they're going to be like, well, that's comics.
Yes.
So they're not going to really see outside of that spectrum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for example, Asterix was turned into an animation, and it's also been a feature film. Not that great, but it it doesn't compare to
Gerard Depardieu.
Good choice, but it was just weirdly anyway. But the point is that it's also been turned into films and Tintin now, and so it's wrong to say that comics are only superheroes, because there's a wealth of European comics and a wealth of material there that just. It was hitting our shores in the 80s when I was looking at comics, but now it's really hard to find it unless you sort of search or buy it internationally. And so the unfortunate thing is Australia is seeing a limited view of what comics are potentially. So what I was doing back in the 90s was try to be as unique and diverse as possible to show Australian comics can be many different things. There's no one style. No, don't fall into the mistake of all the other countries like Japan and Europe and America. You know, I would hate to see Australia get stuck in a rut. So I was trying to present a diverse, you know, and that's one thing I've always been proud of, is I'm always doing different styles. And so, as you mentioned, the TV shows, each one of the shows I worked on, I did a different style for every show because I didn't want to repeat myself. So whenever I do a new project, a new animation or a new comic, it will be a different style. And when I was in America, a lot of the artists, the first time in '87, the artists were often saying that my stuff looked European and that my style was European. And because Geek was actually originally a French company, a lot of French artists were still working there when it was bought out by an American firm. And I got to meet a guy called Guy Delcourt, and he's one of the biggest publishers in France. And I stayed with him for a bit. He invited me to stay with him, and he was fantastic. And he was going to do Zooniverse originally. And as you know, my dream has always been the European comic market, and so it would have been perfect. But I asked him, you know, my work, do you think it's, everyone says it's European. Do you think it's European? He says, no, it looks American. And so I had this strange thing. When I came back to Australia, somebody actually said, well, why don't you do something that's Australian? I said, well, America doesn't want it, Europe doesn't want it, it must be Australian. Yeah. And that's the problem, is I have my own style, but it's very hard to, sometimes it's hard to tell that one person did all these things because I have so many different, I don't like to get stuck in a rut. I like to do so many different styles.
And I suppose that works as well when it comes to, you know, because most different projects are going to have their own style anyway. I mean, depending on the, I suppose the models that are used for the characters and all of that. I mean, when it came to real Ghostbusters, I mean, which
Extreme Ghostbusters.
Extreme Ghostbusters, yeah. I mean, how was that creating, you know, for that? And I suppose now that you're part of that 30-year history as well. So you know, I mean, what have you taken from that? What
I've enjoyed about the whole experience of working in Hollywood was I've learnt more about how powerful these characters can be and how powerful these ideas can affect people, especially children. And when I was there, I was a bit, we were trying to make things that were scary and in animation, because we knew it would get stepped down by the time it's animating. But because the characters were brave, and there was one character, Garrett, who was in a wheelchair, and when Richard wanted to do a character in a wheelchair, and at the time it was like a real risk, you know, it's something he just wanted to do. There was no real reason other than he wanted to do it, and it was very risky. There was a lot of resistance And in my character design, I was always trying to represent the tradition in the 80s when I started was white guy, blonde hair, baseball cap backwards, you know, and that was the hero always. And I was always fighting against that, that sort of tradition, let's say. So I'd always push, you know, more variety, racial variety in my main cast. And Richard would go, no, I don't, no, I'm not, you know, and he'd go through the characters, and eventually I'd be able to squeeze more and more. Like on Extreme Ghostbusters, I wanted a lot more women, because usually there's one token woman.
Yep.
And I was pushing to put 3 women and a few guys, you know, and it didn't, the trouble is that I was trying to fit his, he had an idea in his head of what he was wanting, and I was just trying to find that. But while he was still in that mode, I was trying to sort of push variety in there to give the show potentially a lot of choice, a lot of different ideas.
Yeah.
So it's not a criticism of him at all. It's just that he had a vision, and he was really sort of feeling that through the designs I was putting in front of him.
And if it wasn't fitting to what he wanted,
he'd reject it.
Yeah.
So it's not a reflection on him if he rejected the female characters. It was just that he had an idea of it being this as the cast. And so he had this character, Garrett. And originally I pushed Garrett as a female character, as Lucy. And he just said, it's just not what I'm looking for, you know. So she became Garrett. I basically made her male, and that is how we got Garrett. And so this whole sort of nebulous, this is the fun thing, is I've been at the beginning of these sort of nebulous moments where concepts or shows could go one way or another.
Yep.
An artist I could have been chosen for Jumanji, then I wouldn't have been chosen for Extreme Ghostbusters. And so as a result, you've got these artists and fans now who draw in these styles and draw these characters, but if you show them, well, Garrett could have been this, it's quite shocking, it's quite surprising. And for them, it's like, what was it like working on these shows? Because they're looking at it from the viewpoint of a fan. I'm looking at it from the viewpoint of somebody who was working on a job. So for me, it's very difficult because I'm looking at it as like, well, it's hard work, you know. It was really tough, you know, and we had a lot of deadlines, and it was almost impossible. We made the shows, but it was a tough call because of, you know, you have incredible deadlines, and we would find that when the shows came out, we'd be embarrassed to watch them because the animation, I found the noses would float on the faces, the characters would look different from shot to shot, and it was really hard for me to watch it. The fun thing was to watch when the shows were sort of in rush form, or when they had the final episode, they'd screen it in front of the crew, and you'd hear different departments groaning at different moments. So you'd hear the prop department who do all the props. You'd hear them moan when a car would come on because somebody got something wrong. You'd hear the background department go, oh, when a building was wrong, and the character department would moan when we see a character wrong or a creature wrong. And it was just really funny to sort of, you know, in the end they'd stop screening them because all the departments were just like, oh man, you know, you just hated, or the storyboard guys would get upset about something else. So I didn't watch a lot of the episodes. To be honest, I haven't seen a lot of the shows that I've worked on because either they were airing and I was just exhausted by Saturday morning, I was just too tired, or I was just sick of seeing it, you know. Or I'd moved on to a whole new show. That was often the case. By the time Ghostbusters came out, I watched a few of the first ones, of course, but then I haven't seen most of the last ones. I can't even tell you what the scripts were because it was just cranking through the work so fast. And it's hard because the fans go, oh, you remember in this moment when this, is that possible? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't write the damn thing. You know, I just drew the pictures. So
I didn't work on the science part of things, you know. It was just, you know.
I just drew. That's the prop department. You need to talk to them. Give them a hard time.
Actually, it's kind of funny. I mean, you're saying that, you know, spotting mistakes and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think I saw something just recently, and I think the example they'd used were the Ninja Turtles cartoon back then, and where, you know, you'd have the wrong color mask with characters, or the wrong voices put to the wrong graphic, and
which it wouldn't be hard to do because they're so similar. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, and I think there are so many YouTube videos of those going up now. Where you kind of go,
they pop.
Yeah, you just kind of laugh because you know something gets missed, and it just happened because I mean they are being churned through so quickly.
And it's all hand painted. That's the thing that people forget is back then everything was. Helen was working in the color department, and she'd basically color comp. So she'd be taking our designs and she'd be painting on the backs of cells. She got them wrong. She had to get a scalpel and scrape off all the paint. That's the only way to undo your work or start again. And so they had these pots of paint that were exactly the same colors as they had in. Originally it was Japan, Then Japan, when they got too busy, outsourced to Korea. Then Korea outsourced to the Philippines, and the Philippines outsourced to now I think it's Vietnam. And so they keep outsourcing as they get too busy, or as their industry becomes strong, like the Japanese industry became strong, and then they didn't need to do all that outsourcing work as much to America. But that was the problem, is because everything went to another country, it all had to be translated.
And
it's huge amount of work.
Translation, a lot
of stuff, yeah. Like hand gestures were always very difficult. You'd have little, stuff would just not translate. It'd be like, just like, they didn't understand culturally what was going on.
Yeah.
So it'd have to be a retake, it'd have to be sent back, they'd have to reanimate it. You'd get colour pops. Like sometimes lips wouldn't be coloured right.
Right, yeah.
There'd be checkers, timers and checkers, and the checkers would watch everything coming back and make sure that it was correct.
You could tell when something was going to move, because, say for example, you had like the body there, but you notice that the arm was a slightly different green or something like that. So yeah.
Well, there's another art to that, is different layers of cells change the colour of the paint. So you'd actually have so a skin tone would have to be slightly brighter for the underneath layer. So you'd have to know which layer. Everything would have to be carefully, for every second, would have to be carefully annotated, so that you knew that this color, this cell was going to not move, so that it would be on the bottom, and it would then have a slightly brighter color than the one on the top that would be moving. So sometimes you get a mouth that's, it's popping over the top of the face, and sometimes it would be placed wrongly, or it would shift, and they'd have to retake all that stuff. It's incredible amount of work. Yeah. We were friends with one of the timers, and the amount of work that went in. They had these dope sheets, and they'd have to time every second. And at one point, she got stuck on how a creature for the opening of Ghostbusters happened, because I'd be very involved in the opening titles with Richard directed all of the main titles for Jumanji, for Ghostbusters. When I saw the Jumanji main title that he directed, it chokes me up. Like I'm almost in tears every time I see it, because I know what he went through to make it and how beautiful the end result is. And Ghostbusters, they're so inspiring, and even Godzilla, he was so good at sort of putting these main titles together, the opening titles. It's just wonderful, and I sincerely wish that he'd had more opportunities to direct, because I love, he'd listen to music to begin with, and then he'd sort of direct to the music. So for months he'd be sort of locked away in an office trying to find the music that would work. And for Starship Troopers, which was our first CG show, he was locked away in a room, and he was using Prodigy music, and it was just amazing. It was so cool. And when he put it to the footage that was coming out of Foundation Imaging, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And unfortunately, none of that has ever, I have some on video, and if we can find that and get that up on YouTube, my God, it's so inspiring. But I guess because of the Prodigy music, it might be a problem, but it's the coolest thing. When we first saw that with no CG, when we first saw that after seeing no CG shows, other than, well, it was Mainframe, of course, but their thing is that they didn't use shadows, and there's a lot of stuff, and it wasn't
the early
quite
stuff was fairly basic, I suppose, because it was all, it was new.
Yes.
So yeah.
And I've been wanting to do 3D stuff with Richard. Richard had the vision to want to do 3D stuff, but we'd all been excited about it since Knick Knack, which was the first thing that John Lasseter did. We'd all been excited about this new technology, and we tried to get it into the Nintendo stuff, but financially it couldn't be done, and technically it couldn't be done. And we went to PDI, Pacific Data Images was the studio that got bought out by DreamWorks, but we went there to try and see if we could get a show going with them. They ended up, there was a project, the thing that the thing they did with Richard, with PDI, was an episode of The Simpsons, because he was now working at The Simpsons. He did this 3D episode, if you remember that at all, where Homer becomes 3D. Yeah. And he fell out of this 3D world.
Cakes.
he fell into a dumpster on Melrose Avenue.
Yeah.
And we were in Queensland when we saw that. And Helen and I, having seen that episode, we saw the dumpster scene where he walks down Melrose, and it was like we suddenly got homesick for LA again. And we realised at that point we had two homes. We had LA was a home, and Australia was a home. And that's what sort of triggered that maybe we need to go back. And that's what led us into, when Australia closed all the doors, we thought, the only door open is is Richard, and Richard's saying, come work with me on Extreme Ghostbusters. And so we did. And we stayed there for the last 15 years. Yeah, it was about that long. So we came back 2010.
Yep.
Tried animation, doing stuff on loop-to-loop. We thought that maybe the animation experience might open up some doors. So I was doing stuff in Flash, and Helen was doing her work on Flash, and we posted that on loop-to-loop, and every month they'd have a challenge, and then we go where everybody had a theme. So you'd have a theme of like, let's make an easy one, like rock. So you had to do something based on rock.
Mm-hmm.
And so all the animators in Melbourne and wherever around the world would get busy, and then we'd screen the animations once a month.
The Fed Square, yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, it was in the Loop Bar of all things in Melbourne.
Of course.
Yeah. So it was really a great coincidence that Loop to Loop was screening at the Loop Bar, and they still do it there, and it's fantastic. I really enjoy. For us, for Helen and myself, it was the first time that we'd actually seen our animations in front of an audience, where you could get feedback and responses from people. So it was very rewarding and interesting to see the audience response. Sometimes my stuff, because I was doing Zooniverse, the whole point of coming back to Australia was to get back to our own personal projects. I'd done enough for Hollywood over all these decades, and I just felt, look, I want to get back to my concept. The original reason I went to work in America was that there was the opportunity that the guys that we're working with were going to set up their own studio, and they were talking about that, and they said, well, we don't have a project, we'd like to do Zooniverse as an animation. So back in '87, that was the only reason I left to work with them, because there's a bunch of artists who want to set up their own studio, and I could be the person who does the first concept of theirs. It could be Zooniverse. I wouldn't go just for money. That's not my way of operating. It was the offer, this carrot. And so for all those decades, that carrot was dangled in front of my face of like, yeah, we'll work on your show. You know, if you come do our thing, then we'll help you. And I helped all these people's careers. They got Emmys. I got an Emmy. They got all these accolades, awards, and careers. But it was always this sort of dangling carrot that, yeah, we'll work on yours after mine. Okay, see ya. You know, and so it ended up this situation where it's like, you know what, after this long, and I hit 50 or 49 at the time, it was just like, you know what, I've had enough. I finally... I've got no work, I'm not enjoying where I'm at, I'm getting sick, I need to come back to Australia. And so we decided to leave, and I started doing Zooniverse as animations. And Helen and I together combined did 22 animations. It's about 15 minutes worth of animation just on our own with no funding, no money, no support. And we got really seriously broke. And no real opportunities came out of it. And so we started looking at self-publishing our comics after that.
Yeah, so which you've been like focusing on pretty much full time now.
Yeah.
So the last couple of years of the cons, you've got the new prints of Zine Tunes now, and which have been really, really good, really great.
Yeah, it's been fun.
And I suppose, and going forward now, that's what you're mainly working on.
Yeah, well, the plan has always been to do this full time, and so we can survive on our own projects and do it full time. That's the dream. And so since November last year, we've been paying our rent simply off work that we've been doing on our own projects for Image Comics.
Which is great.
America.
Yeah.
Again, America, but you know, it's a whole other career now and a whole other industry.
And I suppose, I mean, back then when it was first, working for America, it really was you had to be there. While now, the way things are, digital and all that, you've got the ability to, work from here and, send stuff over. So, the projects you're working on at the moment, right now, so what's happening with Image?
Yeah, that's a whole other story. You're going to regret that. All right, so Image, there's a weird little story associated with the Image connection, because I approached Image, and I approached IWD, and I approached all these different independent publishers in America, and their editors just didn't contact me back. And so that sort of fell in a heap. And then out of the blue, Brandon Graham had been contacting me. And it turns out that he was 10 years old when the original Zooniverse came out in America. It was one of the projects, or one of the comics, that inspired him to get into that. Basically, from 10 years on, he knew exactly what he wanted to do, and he cites Zooniverse as one of his major influences at that age. So years later, 30 years later, he contacts me and he says, hey, I'd really like to get you doing Zooniverse again. Would you be interested in that? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And he said, well, why don't we, I'm thinking of making this anthology comic called Island. I'd love to put Zooniverse in that, and Helen's work, her project, she can put that in there as well. And we ended up with this situation where we were being paid to work on our own projects, and that's what we've been doing. But Zooniverse is a really complex and slow process because every panel I do is rigged for animation.
Right.
So every single panel that I do for Zooniverse moves. The heads move, they can blink if they need to, the elbows all move, the hands all, everything rotates. So I'm doing it all in Flash, and it's all prepared for animation. It takes me a while. So the first 10 pages took me about 6 months to do. Very time consuming. And I was also building stuff in 3D when I didn't quite know how to do a complex shape. I'd build it in 3D. So he said, look, this is probably going to take too long. You won't be able to pay your rent. How about, he had another idea that he'd been working on with his wife. Think of a name. Marion. So Marion Churchland, I think her name is. Marion Churchland is his wife. And I hope I have her last name right. So he's working with so they basically put together this concept of a place called 8 House, and his idea with that is that this is like Marvel and DC have their universes, have their multiverses. So this is a multiverse that he's created called 8 House, and other artists can then put their concepts into 8 House and do a story however they want to write it or conceive it about different families that come from these 8 houses. And he opened it up to us, and we thought about it, and Helen and I started writing ideas down. Now, the thing that's cool is that because it's Image, we own the rights, we own the property. So this is like Marvel sort of saying, of our universe, Kirby can own any of the characters that he creates. Yep. And that could have been the relationship. With his own creation, he could have owned them. But so this is what we're doing, is this opportunity where one overriding universe has a number of different artists who own all of the properties and all of the characters that they create for this universe. So what I thought, talking to Helen, we sort of came up with this idea of Zooniverse is a very personal project. Why don't we do something that's more for the fans, more for the TV audience, more for the kids who, because Brandon was encouraging me to post my stuff on the internet. I was very nervous after 9/11 and America becoming a very totalitarian country. I have to say it that way. I couldn't say that in America because of Guantanamo, but I can say it here a bit more safely. But it was becoming, they were very much watching what you're up to and what you're saying. And that was really starting to become more prevalent. And I didn't like that energy. I really didn't like being there for that. So we came back to sort of be free of that kind of, that war obsession that America was building up and deliberately building up, the government mainly. And so I was very paranoid about posting things on the internet. And Brandon was encouraging me, and he had this sort of very open attitude to the internet that I hadn't experienced before. So he said, DA, Twitter, I was still nervous about Twitter, Facebook, and he got me involved in putting stuff on there.
Most celebrities do much worse. So I think you're fine.
Twitter's weird for me, but because I'm not a gag writer, so I need to, obviously I'm long-winded, so
you're restricted how many words you can use.
And I know I'm going to goof something up, and then you get all this rage, and I don't want to deal with all that. So
I think the trick to use is, think of that one sentence, and then you got to have a hashtag at the end. If not 2. Right. Sometimes 3. But yeah.
Always worried I'm going to embarrass somebody or embarrass myself or say something that just won't work, So.
And then if you need to, you just you make several Twitters, and or if something does go wrong, you just kind of go, "Oops, my bad." Whatevs. Hashtag. So
meh.
It's fine. I think the attention span of people today is very short anyway.
It's very interesting. So I'm not used to all that, like the whole throwaway thing with Facebook and Tumblr and things like that. I'm really not used to that, because when I do work, I want it to last, and it's a whole new mindset for me to throw away stuff. And I
think the important thing is that you put enough out there to keep someone interested, and that's what they need. They need prompts. And if you have enough prompts out there, then they're going to kind of go, you know what, and they're going to stick with it.
Follow the bread trail.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
exactly.
Yeah,
And I think that's the main trick.
Yeah.
But
I think you're right.
yeah, it's
It's definitely, like I was talking to Brandon and I was saying, I'm so intimidated by DeviantArt because you've got all these young people posting all this stuff, and a lot of them are living in their parents' houses and they've got no overhead, and they can just do this, and they can go for these jobs and undercut. I don't know how I can survive in this. And he said his strategy was to make yourself a brand. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of that or thought about that. And so he was saying, look, if you can get yourself the person, the place, then that's the way you do it. And I found that very insightful and helpful because he's helping me through image to sort of essentially brand myself and brand what I'm doing. And so, as I said, with 8 House, it's actually a bridge between my personal work on Zooniverse and making a commercial work that Brandon can really get behind. And by making it, what I've done is taken all of the experience, all of the ideas and all of the shows that I've worked on with all these different styles, and I've put them into one concept. And so it has elements of Ghostbusters, Godzilla, Tuttenstein. All these different shows are kind of hinted at and represented in this new concept. So Helen and I have been sort of coming up with this overriding concept and idea, why it's happening and what's going on in this story. And we've actually been having a lot of fun. I've actually filled half a sketchbook already with ideas. And
it's always a good sign.
Exactly. So there's no shortage of ideas. And because we own it, we actually will start getting royalties for the first time off the work we've done. And this is the thing, in animation, every time those animations are shown, the musician will get royalties. The actors will get royalties. I don't get a cent. But the characters and the character designs are what people are gravitating to and bonding to. And so when you look at places like where the fans post their artwork, they're doing my characters. They're doing my design. The way that they do monsters and kaiju, very reminiscent of the stuff that I was doing on Godzilla. Wasn't like that before Godzilla, And so before I set that style, there wasn't that look. And so it wasn't available to people. And so by me sort of bringing those styles to life and bringing those characters to life, and focusing the actors, the voice actors, because often when I did them, I didn't have the voice actors, I didn't have the voices, I was just working blind. But by sort of people identify with that face of that character being that voice, and when they see the actors, like, oh, that's not what I was expecting, and they totally identify with, I'm essentially like this weird actor where I have to place faces on all these personalities in the shows, in the animations. But I don't get any royalties for any of my work, and I see all these people imitating this, which is great. I'd rather people draw than they get all caught up in war and go out and kill somebody. I'd much rather. That's the one thing I'm really proud of, is all the millions of people who are inspired to draw. There's one less person picking up a gun and going shooting someone. So that's a legacy I certainly can be proud of. And I want to inspire more people to do. That's the trouble. I was in a place in America at the end of our time there where I just felt I was useless. I felt like I'd run out. I hadn't run out of ideas, but I'd run out of opportunities. And I felt that the audience had moved on and I was sort of left behind. So thanks to Brandon sort of opening up the possibilities again, and to Loop de Loop and Neil Sanders, putting all that effort into Loop de Loop, it gave us opportunities to sort of get the work out again. And thanks to all these conventions, the expos, we're able to meet the public and attempt to educate them about, there was an Australian guy behind all this stuff, And so together, Helen and I want to republish the old work, but then also publish the new stuff. And because Image will be publishing it, we'll sort of get an opportunity to publish it here in Australia, because not many people get to see the Image stuff. So
that's really
not
good.
to compete with Image, but it's like they get their market, and we'll just quietly sort of have it here at just conventions and stuff.